Question I'm going to kind of wrestle with this morning, a question that puzzles me this morning, is probably not an obvious one, but it is a mystery of sorts if you really ponder the possibility of grace. Grace understood as the free gift of God's love, of God's welcome, of God's forgiveness to all God's children, no strings attached. That grace simply comes out of the abundance of God's compassion for all creation. And the question might seem simple enough, but maybe one you haven't thought of, and that question is, why are we so offended by grace? By that, I think we find it difficult, if not impossible, to embrace this core teaching and preaching of Jesus, that God's love is not dependent on our actions or even our beliefs about God being right and correct. God's love for us is not rooted in orthodoxy, right belief, or orthopraxis, right action. God's love is a gift without exception, unearned, unmerited. This is the very definition of what we mean by grace. Yet, I think we are offended by grace. Why is that? So I noticed this. I've been noticing recently, I go to Casey's just about daily to get my coffee and slice of breakfast pizza. I got to have my breakfast pizza. And I noticed at this Casey, there's a sign. It's very prominent. It's by the register. And the sign is an official governmental sign that says, there are restrictions, no soda, no candy, on what people can buy on SNAP benefits. Have anybody else seen those signs around? And if you observe, it asks, someone doing so, please report it to the appropriate governmental agency. In other words, be a narc, right? I guess. As if I knew who used SNAP benefits and not. As if I should be that focused on that. And in part, this is part of the context the past year or two because of significant cuts to SNAP, right? These benefits to help feed hungry people with the reasoning that unless people had verifiable jobs, and that is part of the logic, they shouldn't get free food. Unless you have a job. Now, I can't fully understand if one has a job why one cannot afford, but in the world we live today, there are a number of people who have 2 or 3 jobs in which they cannot afford enough to feed themselves. But in order to get the food, they have to prove they have jobs. Now, several of our state politicians who've asserted people don't deserve something that they don't work for. Now, in many ways, the argument is that people shouldn't get free food if it's undeserved. So why do we find it so offensive that grace could be extended to a hungry, poor neighbor? And we are. And I would argue that many Christians these days find God's grace offensive. We envision God up there, out there, maybe an old man in the sky, adjudicating every action, every improper behavior, the cosmic judge in heaven, along noting all the rules that have been broken and we are breaking. And what's sad about that image of God out there is we actually internalize that inside ourselves, often Christian faith is defined as feeling guilty and ashamed. We internalize those voices of self-judgment, critical of our perceived mistakes, our perceived failures. Sometimes I think, and this is true, most of us, the last person we extend grace to is ourselves. Our story this morning is about a resistance to grace. How on the Sabbath, Jesus was walking along through a grain field, and because he and his disciples on the Sabbath are hungry, they are picking the heads of the grain to feed them. And then later, another part of that story is Jesus is at a synagogue and where he heals a man with a shriveled hand. And in both cases, the religious folk, the religious leaders, not only criticize Jesus, but condemn Jesus for breaking the rules about Sabbath. I mean, I don't know if it jumped out at you, but at the end of that passage, they are so offended, we are told, they went out immediately because he fed hungry people, because he healed a man. They are so offended on the Sabbath that they go out and they plot to kill Jesus. That seems like an odd, offensive towards grace. Now, lest we judge the Pharisees too harshly, we should understand in many ways how central the practice of Sabbath were for the folks, for their faith. How observing the Sabbath was actually the linchpin of their faith. It was the marker for their identity of who they were, a central commandment of all things. This was most important, what God wanted for them. So the Sabbath wasn't just some silly rule, it was the very definition of what it meant to be faithful for them, who they were as a people, who God was in the world. So they were offended by Jesus' actions because it called into question the very essence of what they believed, of what they practiced, of what they taught. And the truth is, probably we are all offended by grace like them because it questions some of our own long-standing, long-held religious assertions and expectations about how we think God ought to work in the world. Grace is offensive to us because if we truly understand and truly believe in the gift of God's love freely given, then it breaks the very rules we may have held for many of us, many generations, rules or ideas that we think central to who we are, defining us as a community of faith. You will not be surprised that many Christians find our welcoming, our inclusion, our embrace of LGBTQ folks offensive. Offended by the very sign out front our door. In part, I understand because they have been taught that this inclusion challenges long-held important beliefs central to their faith. And to break from this stance is to bring into question the essence of what they believe. No wonder it's offensive. What they believed was a defining characteristic of what it meant to be the church, to preach, to embody as a community a kind of grace of God that is not only welcoming, but actually loves people previously excluded from the church. It's just going too far. It's what the Pharisees thought. Jesus, you're just going too far. You don't follow the rules. Now, I'm struck by Jesus' response to his critics. And I don't, when I hear the words Jesus says this morning, I don't hear them so much as being angry or denouncing them, though Jesus has his moments in the gospel of heated conflict with religious authority. I don't see it in this story. He simply does something very profound. He points out that in their own traditions, in their own stories of faith, they have instances in which the rule wasn't followed. Sabbath was not observed. And he reminds them the important thing about our tradition, and I think we can say that not only for the Jewish tradition, but also for our own faith, God desires mercy. Not sacrifice. God desires mercy most of all. And he pointed out in the simple example of a sheep that falls into a pit. Will you not take hold of that sheep, lift it out of the, he asked, how much more valuable are human beings? People are more important than the rules we impose about what is right and what is not. People are more important and deserving of compassion than some staid rules about how and who we're supposed to be. Something maybe we can remind ourselves in a world in which grace offends so many. So I haven't told this story in a long time, so I'm hopeful that most of you haven't heard me tell this story. For those who did, just pretend like it's the first time. So it was about an experience of grace. And it happened when I was 12 years old. And when I was 12, and what happened was I invited my best friend over, and it was kind of, I was at that age in which mom and dad were leaving me alone without babysitters. And so invited my best friend over, and mom and dad were going to a party across the alley. They called them hurricane parties, not because of the weather, if you know what I mean. And so I remember as my mom and dad go out, my mom turns to me and my best friend and says to us, do not run in the house. Do not run. And so they leave. Guess what? Got a football out. We're chasing each other all around the house, running around, just moving, just having the best time, chasing each other and tossing it around until all of a sudden I heard a crash. And there on the floor, my friend exclaimed, there on the floor was my mom's brand new wooden dining room chair with the top broken off. It was a catastrophe. So what we did, what any normal 12-year-old kids do, we tried to cover it up. Locked the back door, got the chair up, we got some glue. I was smart. Rags with brown shoe polish, kind of glued it back on, and we're putting the brown shoe polish. But unfortunately, right at that moment, my mom arrives back home to check on us. She didn't trust us for some reason. Arrives back home and discovers the door locked and knocks on it. And so we stash, I remember in the laundry room, stash the glue and the brown shoe polish, throw it in to the room. And she comes in and she looks at us and she knows something's happened. I will say the chair looked brand new. I will there. We did an amazing job. She would never have discovered it. She did say it was the brown shoe polish on our faces and hands and the smell of glue in the air that hinted at it. And she asked what happened. And so we did what every normal 12-year-old boy would do. We blamed each other. But finally it came out. We confessed to what we'd done. And I remember my mom's face as we're telling her. It began to get a deeper color of red, and her eyes began to bulge. And there was about to be this explosion. And I remember thinking the judgment of God is coming down upon us. But then she burst out in laughter. She says she was just glad to know we weren't sniffing glue, you know. But she just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I realized that's grace. We're expecting God's judgment. For with the shoe polish on our hands, the smell of glue in the air, we're expecting God to condemn us, but instead we hear the laughter of grace. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.